What's up, guys, and welcome back to Invariance.Poker podcast. It's been about 7 months since our last podcast, and because we just had to pause due to some logistical issues, but here we are back again, and I think we'll hopefully get things on a more consistent basis. And the good thing is that I'm able to pull Kyle in, who's our guest speaker. And if you watch TCH live stream, he's one of the regulars, and he's a high stakes player. So we'll actually be able to give you insights into the mindsets of a high stakes player. What's up, Kyle?
How you doing, man? Really good to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you moved up.
Sure. So I'm not a professional poker player. I'm just someone that really likes poker. I take it really seriously. But I have a job. I've always had a job. And I first started into poker in probably 2015. Was a terrible player, lost a lot of money. There was a period of my life where after a Friday or a Saturday, I had enough money for gas in my car and Taco Bell.
Yeah.
And that was about it. That was after a while you grow out of that sort of young man way of living, and you want to actually win at the game, right? So that's when, about 2012 is when I really started taking it seriously, and I said, okay, I'm gonna try to study, I'm gonna try to play consistently, I'm gonna leave when I'm tilted, just all these things that I had to check off before I actually started winning money at poker. But yeah, I started taking this seriously in about 2012. I play about 1,000 hours a year, which is like 20 hours a week basically.
And I'm not sure where we met. We met either at WinStar or was at the Poker Room of Texas, the first supposedly legal poker club.
Yeah, I think we met at Poker Rooms of Texas, but I saw you a lot. I'll tell you when I sort of first saw you in 2013, 2014. I was grinding 1-2 and I was living in Oklahoma City at the time, and occasionally I was trying to step up to 2-5, and I play at Riverwind at 2-5 every once in a while, but occasionally I would drive all the way down to WinStar, and I would jump in these 2-5 games, and it was really exciting at the time, mountains of red chips, and I would always see this person with this pyramid of red chips. So before I even met you, you were this person that I sort of held in really high regard. I want to crush the game like that guy. So yeah, that's when I first saw you. But I think the first time we actually met was Poker Rooms of Texas around 2017.
Right. Yeah. And so you pretty much did it the right way. Most of people like me, we have to mingle our living expenses and poker. And whereas you just kept it separate, and you were able to move up, and now you're playing high stakes. Yeah,
and honestly, I would suggest that to a lot of people that want to take poker seriously. Poker is very hard, right? And it gets harder. It's a lot less stress, especially like if you're talking about, hey, I'm playing 1-2 or 2-5 right now. I'm thinking about trying to take this really seriously and go for it. You can definitely go down that road, but there's also an easier path of just having a job and then treating poker completely separately. So, like for example, like what you were saying. When I was grinding at 1-2, all the money that I won at 1-2 went to the poker bankroll. Nice. And why was I able to do that? I was able to do that because I have a job. All my living expenses were covered by the job. Now, it does take a lot of time when you do this. I mean, you're working at least 40 hours a week, and then you're doing 20 hours of poker on top of that, and then you have a life, right? So it's not the path for everybody, but it's definitely a way to go. Before I really stepped up to 2-5 full time, I think I had won $50,000 at the 1-2 by that.
Oh, nice. How long did it take you there?
A long time.
Like,
a long time. And so like 2012 is when I first started, playing seriously and building a bankroll. Mostly playing 1-2 and then jumping into 2-5 games, but it wasn't until 2015 when I moved out into Washington, D.C. that I started playing not full-time 2-5, but like only playing 2-5 and only playing 1-2 while I'm waiting.
So when you first started studying, what did you actually study?
Like when I first started poker, you have to go back to like, originally first starting poker was like with my grandmother, but when I was a little kid. But when you got excited about it was like rounders and the thing that happened to everybody, rounders and Moneymaker and Fossil Man and the ESPN Attitude Era of like poker. that's when I first got started. And I read some books. I read some books. Back then, there were like only books on limit. There wasn't a lot of like no limit hold'em books. You would go to something called Barnes and Noble. I don't know if your listeners know what that is, but it's where you buy a book. A book is where it has words on it and you read. But that's originally how I got started. I forget the guy's name. I don't think he was a big name in poker, but that was the first book that I read. I read some TJ Cloutier books. Shout out to TJ Cloutier. On tournament poker, I read some like Dan Harrington back in the day. But as far as like what really helped me at the 1-2 in 2012 was I started figuring out my own strategies for beating the game. And we can actually talk about sort of some of those like old school strategies if you want, on like how to like crush two back, one like the progression of 1-2 and like, you want to get into that?
Yeah, for sure, because that really is the goal here, is because we want to give insights into the difference between the low stakes and the high stakes.
Sure. So like, let's give an example of like back in the day, what 1-2 games were like, and like a maximally exploitive strategy to those 1-2 games. So like, let's just talk about a little progression first. 2005 poker, right? Let's think about it. If you had
pre-Black Friday, right?
Pre-Black Friday, it was like the craziest time to play poker. Would you agree with me that if you flop top pair middle kicker, you could bet all three streets and not sweat about it, and you would get called?
Most likely because people can't fold pairs.
People can't fold over pair. Yeah, people can't fold pairs. Yeah, exactly. So like the people that knew that in the game, they had that strategy. Like, okay, all I got to do is flop top pair or an over pair, and I'm just gonna, or better, and I'm gonna bet three streets and I'm gonna get paid. Well, then the fit or fold players came along and exploited those people.
So then a lot of, like when I first started, basically fit or fold, set mining. Set mining was very popular back then. Like you just sat there and set mine all day and you get paid.
And people took it to even more extremes, right? Especially in deeper games. They would play any two suited cards looking to flop two pair or better. And then stack people that are trying to bet top pair, decent kicker, or over pairs, three streets. And they're not going to fold top pair because at that point, just getting money in with top pair, decent kicker was like printing money, right? So the fit or fold players were trying to just flop two pair or better, then he trash for cheap, and then stack these people that were doing this with the over pairs and the top pairs. So let's talk about like the first time that someone really laid out. It was a gentleman. He still plays it up in Oklahoma City. His name is Howard. Very great exploitive player. He really laid out for me how to exploit that fit or fold strategy, right? So this was the first time that I really like had a strategy where I was trying to maximally exploit somebody. So if you think about the fit or fold people, and it was usually a table of fit or fold players by that point. We're talking like 2012, 2013. You would try to what's called find the number of the table. You're going to keep upping your bet until you find the number where one person calls. Sometimes it would be like $20, $25. And as you did this, like your range got tighter and tighter. Eventually, like you're just like playing like Broadway hands and like nines plus, right? when you're raising to 20 in a 1-2 game. You never get 3-bet because this is a fit or fold table, right? So you never get punished for that. And then on top of that, these fit or fold players are putting in like 10 big blinds. They're putting in like $20, $25, $30, and then they're playing fit or fold on the flop. So when you, against the fit or fold player, do not have it, you bet as small as possible. And back then we thought like 33% was just insanely small. You bet as small as possible. When you flop, when you flop top set or something like that, when you flop something really good, you bet like the pot as big as you can, right? And that's a way to maximally exploit someone that's trying to play fit or fold, right? So that was like the first like really exploitive strategy that I employed at the 1-2 games that worked really well. There was a period of time, there was a year, over 1,000 hours. I made like $40 an hour at the 1-2, which is just 20 big blinds is crazy, right? I don't think I could replicate it these days because people are too good. But you can't really do. I don't want to suggest this to your listeners because like at 1-2 tables these days, there will be like one or two people that are 3-betting more than just like jacks plus ace king, and if they're doing that, you're going to get punished by putting a lot of money in pre-flop. So I just wanted to sort of give that as an example of a maximally exploitive strategy that worked at a small stake game. But I wouldn't say that like this is the way you should play 1-2 now because it's a little more complicated.
Right, because there's a lot more information out there and people know how to at least a little bit more balanced, right?
Absolutely.
And so one of the things you said was exploitative strategy,
Yeah.
and we discussed this a lot. Where at the lower stakes, you have to play a more exploitative strategy. You just find something that doesn't, you just pound at it and pound it.
Absolutely.
Whereas as you move up to the higher stakes, now you have to be more balanced, right? GTO and game theory optimized.
Yeah. So what you said about the lower stakes is completely true. What you said about the higher stakes is true for a little bit. Basically, you want to play a more balanced strategy against people that are paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
And at the high stakes, that can mean someone that takes this game really seriously and studies a lot.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even though JD has a job, I'll throw out JD out there, right?
Yeah.
That's someone that you would want to play balanced against because he's watching. It's very important to construct your strategy around his incentives,
Mm-hmm.
so your strategy doesn't have a lot of holes. Otherwise, he's going to exploit you, right? But against other people that might be at the high stakes, that are there for fun, if they're not paying attention, that's the key. If they're not paying attention, then you can employ a more exploitive strategy against those specific people. But even then, like when you're in the high stakes, the people that you're playing against are typically successful people. Very rarely do we ever play against somebody that just luck sacked into their money,
Mm-hmm.
right? Occasionally you'll get someone with a trust fund or something like that, but for most of the time you're playing with self-made people.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're playing with self-made people, it's all about like, do they have the time to put it into poker? Because if they have the time and the will, like they're going to get good,
Right.
you know? So even though someone owns a business, it doesn't necessarily mean that you should play a really crazy exploitive strategy against them because they're going to pay attention and you're going to get screwed.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you also mentioned incentivize, because we mentioned the other day that there's a difference between the incentives for low stakes and high stakes as well.
100%. And like, I forget who it definitely wasn't me, but I forget who explained like exploitive versus more balanced strategies to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the explanation. The explanation was this: when you play exploitive poker, you're completely focused on your own incentives. The incentive versus your hand versus someone's range, you know, your incentive to make a bluff or don't make a bluff or to value bet thin or whatever it is. And you really only think about your own incentives. When you're playing a more balanced strategy, you're actually thinking about your opponent's incentives, and then you're sort of constructing a more defensive strategy around those incentives.
So that you won't be exploited by them.
Yeah.
And so when you study, right? Do you still study right now?
You know, I have said this before, that I've gotten lazy in the study. And this is something that, you know, it's funny. I'm in tech, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that happens in tech as well. So you get on this hamster wheel of death of study, and eventually you get a little tired,
Right.
and you kind of step off. I would encourage anybody that's playing poker not to do that. It's a dangerous thing to do. Eventually, after stepping off for so long, you get passed by the game, right?
Right.
So I have been a little lazy, but I still look. Whenever there's a hand that I think I really screwed it up, I will go study that hand, and I will go study that spot, and I'll try to get better. But it's not like it used to be. Like, you know, if you want to talk to me in like 2018, 2019, I was doing a lot of study, right? So the ratio is really off. I would say it's like less than 5 hours a week, which is just bad.
So when you study now, so I assume you just go over hands and spots?
These days I go over hands and spots. Back in the day I did a lot of like training,
Mm-hmm.
like a lot of like online, like, you know, training sites.
Yeah.
And those are great. Those are still great. You know, occasionally there will be a video that comes out that really provides some insight to me. But these days, it's more about studying the spot. And then also, because Dallas is a small community,
Mm-hmm.
I'm really thinking about the spot. Like, I don't think he's going to care. I'll talk about Dong, right? I don't think Dong cares about people talking about him out there.
Mm-hmm.
So spending time really thinking about how to play Dong specifically, is worth it.
Okay. So,
right? I mean, like, you know, he's the guy that's like really, really deep in the game, that's going to put the pressure on you, that's going to give you a really hard time. So, like, setting time aside for specific players, I think in a small community does you a lot of good.
And when you study, I assume you're using solvers to find ranges.
Yeah, for sure. You know, I use ranges that people have created that I haven't created myself, right? I use that as a baseline, and then according to whoever I'm playing against, the paradigm that I'm in, am I thinking exploitively, or am I thinking, in a more balanced way? Then you'll use something like PO to study a heads-up spot between the two players. And that's what a lot of people don't realize is just because someone uses PO doesn't mean that they're not doing something exploitive. PO will actually show you really good ways and surgical ways to exploit people. And learning the equilibrium is probably one of the more hard things that I've done in life. Honestly, what I haven't even learned the equilibrium for a bunch of spots. What I've learned is a lot of rough balance for spots, right? I'm still trying to get more precise with that. So I don't want to pretend like I've learned it and I'm done. But it was definitely one of the harder things that I've done. But what it does do is it allows you to think in the game in a more deep manner. And when you want to exploit people, you get a little bit more surgical than you normally would if you weren't studying what the equilibrium should be, right?
Can you give more details on what equilibrium means?
Yeah, so that's a good point. So in every spot in poker, so if people remember, there was a movie back in the day called A Beautiful Mind, and with Russell Crowe, I think. And that was about a man by the name of John Nash. And John Nash did a lot of work on game theory. And he proved that Nash equilibriums exist. And we're getting into you don't really need to know a lot of this for poker, but we're getting a little bit into the history. He proved that Nash equilibriums exist that basically just show that in a two-player game, players can take strategies to where their opponent can deviate, and it doesn't change their, in poker's case, expected value, right? So that's playing in a way where your opponent can't change the amount of money that you're supposed to win for the spot is really good against a good player, right? However, the thing about that is every single spot, and what I mean by spot is stack sizes, flops, range versus range, betting sizes, all of that is a spot, will have a very unique equilibrium. It's impossible to memorize the equilibrium for every spot in poker. So what you end up doing is you look at the equilibrium, that's this complicated output by something like PO, and then you come up with approximate strategies that you can actually memorize. You memorize those approximate strategies, and then you run those approximate strategies versus a perfect opponent with PO. And then you're okay, even with this approximate strategy against clairvoyant computer crusher, I'm losing 1% of EV. This is a good approximate strategy. This is what I'm going to memorize, and this is going to be my equilibrium of the spot, right? When two players are playing the equilibrium, the person that makes it the closest to the equilibrium wins, right? So this is often why JD just makes money from me, right? He's just better at it, right? So I don't lose as much money to JD as some other people, but I definitely still lose money to JD because he's just better at finding the equilibrium in a more exact way than me.
And basically where he finds a spot where he could do one thing and you can't do anything about it, right?
Yeah, sure. Although these days, JD's played with me so much, I'm reasonably sure there are certain lines that he takes in certain spots against me that are exploitive, 100%. Yeah. I mean, we've played together a long time, definitely. He's exploited me in certain spots.
So, but a lot of the online content that I'm studying is more 100 BB, 200 BB deep.
Yeah.
How does that apply to live poker where you're 1,000 BB deep sometimes?
You can make some big mistakes. If all you study is 100 BB and you're now in a 1,000 BB spot and you play 100 BB, I mean, you can lose a lot of money.
Right.
I mean, stack off ranges at 100 BB are so much lighter than stack off ranges at 1,000 BB, and you know this. I mean, it's also there are all kinds of other considerations too. Something that you might have bet the turn with at 100 BB is probably something you're only betting the turn with sometimes at 1,000 BB, right? Because at 100 BB, if they check raise you and you get it in, it's not a big deal with certain hands. But at 1,000 BB, all of a sudden, do you really want to get 1,000 BB with top pair tough kicker? No.
Yeah.
But at 100 BB, it's whatever, no big deal.
But so a lot of the stuff you said in terms of equilibrium stuff, this applies more to high stakes. But
Yeah.
what about low stakes players? Should they consider this, or what's the factors that they should more keep in mind versus equilibrium and game theory?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. It's something that I've thought about. Like if I had to, I've thought about this a lot. If I had to go back in time, go back to 2012, and I would tell myself something. First of all, a lot of the stuff that I study now wasn't out. There wasn't like a lot of the material out there. But if I had the material, I had the ability to tell myself in 2012, how would I study? And because it was so hard for me to learn how to do, and it's still hard for me to this day, do like range versus range analysis. I would tell myself, like, start now, right? Just even though you're not employing it in the game, start learning the sort of GTO stuff now, because it's just going to be so much easier if you just start now rather than starting in 2017. Right. But as far as like what you should play at a 1-2 or a 2-5, generally you should probably play a more exploitive strategy and focus on that, especially when you're trying to build a bankroll. You will make more money. I would not suggest that, especially at like a 1-2 table, if someone employ a GTO strategy. You're still going to win money, by the way. Like if you do it and you just commit to it, you're going to learn GTO and you're still going to win money. You're just not going to win as much. So yeah, that's probably what I would say.
And so let's talk about the number one thing that we see a lot of mid-stakes or low stakes trying to implement is the 3-bet. And for me, a lot of it is being done wrong, especially by the younger kids that are just coming up and moving in.
Okay.
So what are your thoughts on the 3-bet strategies?
So I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying. Are you saying like these kids are coming in, they've studied these charts, and they're only implementing the charts, and they're not thinking about their opponent at like a 1-2 or a 2-5 table?
Correct.
Yeah, I've done that myself. You know, I think it's definitely, again, you're probably. So what I said earlier applies to heads-up spots, where if you play the GTO strategy, you will not lose money, you will make money. In MultiWay Spots, it's different. MultiWay Spots, you can actually play, the GTO strategy for that MultiWay spot. It's really hard to compute, just for everybody out there. Once you get MultiWay, like the complexity of the problem just explodes. So just, a lot of people out there will say there is no GTO for MultiWay, and that's also kind of true. But what someone can do is you could be playing perfectly, and they could take EV from you and hand it to somebody else. Meaning, let's say that you're on the button, and there's a guy in the small blind that 3-bets way too much. And there's a guy in the cutoff that opened, and you're gonna call sometimes on the button, and you're gonna 3-bet sometimes on the button, and you call. The guy in the small blind's 3-betting way too much. Even though you're playing this perfect strategy that you found on a chart, the small blind can actually take EV from you by 3-betting too much and give it to the cutoff. So like, I know we just kind of got in the weeds there, but I just wanted to talk about how, like, even if you play perfectly in MultiWay Spots live, people can do things that take EV from you and give it to someone else, even if you're playing perfectly. So you really do have to pay attention to what players are doing in the game. So yeah, I would definitely think about players individually and what I should be 3-betting them with. So do we want to run through some examples?
Of course.
Let's say we're in a no-rate game, and the small blind loves to squeeze, and I'm on the button, and we're in that cutoff. We're in that Buttonverse cutoff situation. Small blind squeezes way too much, and he loves to squeeze. So that was what we were talking about earlier. Cutoff opens. I'm probably going to have no flats on the button, and the reason for that is small blind squeezing too much. I don't want to give away EV. If I 3-bet, it turns into a cold 4-betting spot, and he's not gonna, or she is not gonna, cold 4-bet nearly as much as they're gonna squeeze a raise and a call. So that's probably one way I would change my 3-betting range on the button where I usually have flats. I would change the 3-bet or fold. let's say someone calls 3-bets too much, right? There's an open in the hijack and I'm in the cutoff. Someone like calls 3-bets way too much. I'm probably going to, and they're sort of a fun player, right? They're not really paying attention. I'm probably going to 3-bet a decent range, probably like 8s plus, all the suited broadways, probably the ace wheels. And then I'm going to probably have an exploitive flat range. Right now, this flat range is shit. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know if I can curse. Sorry.
All good.
This flat range is terrible. It's going to be like pocket pair. Like it's going to be extremely exploitable, but the person isn't paying attention. So I'm going to have this like terrible flat range, and I'm going to have this 3-bet range that's more about trying to get value from someone that only calls 3-bets. So let's talk about the spot that you and I often talk about, and that's the spot where, okay, so just for everybody that's watching, when I play in some 2-5 games with Tommy, sometimes he gets a little annoyed with me, and I think he's right in a way. So what's the spot? It's like the big fish opens, right?
No, he limps.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So like let's say 2-5 game and he has $2,000 and he limps.
Yeah.
So of course I'm in position with him and you're in position on me.
Yeah.
So I want to build a pot because I want to play with him. So I'm pretty much raising all ranges, and I'm not gonna. So I'm playing an exploitative raise, right? Sure. I'm gonna raise small relative to everybody, relative to the thing, because I don't want to, because my hands is weak. I just want to build a pot.
Sure.
But then of course you recognize that, so now you're exploiting me, right?
So you're trying to ISO him, right?
Not even trying to ISO. I'm just trying to build a pot where I actually want to encourage other people in as well, because if other people come in, then he'll more likely come in as well.
So yeah, especially like if we're talking about like you're opening in the low jack, I'm sitting in the, like he's limped like under the gun. You're opening in the low jack, and I'm sitting in the hijack. This is where my paranoia comes in from playing higher, where I get squeezed all the time. If I flat there, like I'm gonna get squeezed like all the time in games I play in, right? So I do tend to play that spot in a more 3-better fold way, and that does push the fish out. It really is like I would rather take the EV up front right there. I know it's a small amount of EV, but the small amount of EV right up front right there than calling, hoping I don't get squeezed, and then hoping for a big multi-way spot and it's multi-way, I'm only going to win some of the time, right? It's not even like a heads-up spot where I'm going to win a big pot. I do understand the logic of, keeping the fish in, and I've heard that not only from you, I've heard that from a lot of live players. It does seem to work out for them. It's just not for me. I don't think there's anything fundamentally wrong with your analysis. I think it's probably correct, but I just don't play in games enough anymore to where that's what I'm doing constantly. So it's just not what I'm used to. It's not what I'm comfortable in. If I did that, I'd have to like think about ranges on the fly and kind of construct on the fly. And like let's talk about that spot in a little more detail if we have time. Like, honestly, Tommy, like how would you play that spot? Because I'm a little lost whenever someone tells me to do something like that. So you tell me, like, give some hand examples, like different kinds of hands, and what you would do against. What kind? Let's start with this. What hands would you 3-bet that spot with? Because like you're not just flatting aces, right?
Well, sometimes I do flat aces also, because like you said, I also pay attention to who's behind me as well and who's most likely to squeeze. Yeah,
well, I mean, if you're punishing the squeezers, totally understand flatting aces. But let's say they're not squeezers in the game. Are you ever flatting aces there?
No, because of course
too deep and
But a hand like jacks and queens is a hand that I might flat so that I could strengthen my flatting range and not be so exploitative where I only 3-bet strong hands and I flat weak hands.
Gotcha.
And then because my skill set is not in terms of math and ranges. I'm more of being able to observe everybody's tendencies, and I'm able to use players against each other, where I could make reads by using, for example, a person as a shield, where if I know that there's a person behind them, I could bet and know that they'll be more honest because there's a person behind them. So I use people against each other to set up hands and play. So it allows me, so having a strong range, flatting range will allow me to do a lot more flop raising. And that's where I think I like to apply pressure on the flop. I don't like to apply pressure pre-flop.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, that makes sense. I really like what you talked about understanding how dynamic live poker is, understanding how players interact with one another. I think that's a skill that a lot of like live pros possess that a lot of like the online guys that came from online poker just don't.
Right.
It's a big deal in a multi-person game to recognize sort of those angles and use them. Not in like a angle in a bad way, but
right.
Recognizing those spots and using players against one another is definitely a skill I lack, and it's a skill that I've seen a lot of good live professional players use that I wish I had a little more of.
For sure. Yeah, because the other day as well, there were two young kids, and every time a bad player either raises and I call, or he limps and I raise, they're constantly squeezing me. And I turn over, one time I said, do you know this is minus EV right now? Because I said, you're pushing out the bad players, and you know that I'm weak. Because I tell you the same thing, you know I'm weak is obvious if you're watching, but now you just basically took all the EV out of the play.
Yeah. You sneak some aces in against those guys?
Yes, I do. If there's some, like, a lot of people, their excuse is, I don't want to get my aces cracked, or MultiWay, I don't know where I'm at. So my answer to that is, well, in general, your range is going to be stronger. So a stronger range is going to win more pots anyway. So
sure.
It's not, yes, you're going to lose a lot of your aces or kings flatting, but in general, you're going to also win more pots post-flop because you have a stronger range. So I think it balances out. And where it matters is your ability to be able to lay down those hands when you know you beat, as well as extract in value, because it's multi-way and you're not very far ahead or far behind.
Yeah, playing a lot with you over the years, it does seem like you prefer to play in higher SPR spots in general.
Yes.
Right? You feel like you can navigate, and just correct me if I'm wrong, you feel like you can navigate in the high SPR spots, and that's where you have a really big edge on a lot of recreational players, right? I think the beauty of live poker is that it's a completely it's not like online.
Yeah.
Online, there's like one way to win. Live poker, there's so many ways to win. There's so many arguments to be had. There's so many different ways to sort of maximally exploit and gain a little bit more EV. That you can really do a lot of things. And I it's funny, the older I've gotten and the more poker that I've played, the less sure I am of my own strategy, and the more open I am to just listening to other people and listening to other people's perspectives and how they approach the game. I don't want to mention his name, but there's a gentleman that I play with at the high stakes. I don't understand at all. He runs some of the games. I don't understand how he plays, honestly. Like I don't understand, but it's been like a year now and he still wins. So just because I don't understand it doesn't mean that it's not good, because it's, from looking at it from the outside, it's very good.
Yeah, I think I know who you're talking
about.
Yeah. So I assume that a lot of his wacky plays are more for marketing and branding, image building, right?
Yeah, I don't know. Especially lately, he does those wacky plays so often. But what really gets me is he has that I've seen so far in Dallas. He has the best timing and bluffs that I've seen in Dallas. Meaning, he doesn't really get caught that often, which is so rare when you're bluffing with a little frequency. Like, he's not bluffing with like a GTO frequency, but he is bluffing enough to where, man, he should be caught a lot more than he is, which means he understands these spots really well, and he understands when to run these bluffs, which has just been really impressive. So it's this funny thing where I troll JD and I tell him that this player is probably the best player in Dallas now. But there's truth to that too. I mean, like he's had really good results, even though I don't understand the strategy. Other people don't understand the strategy so much. Doesn't mean that he isn't crushing the game.
Yeah. I think he and I have a very similar strategy in that we try to play more the player versus GTO.
Oh, for sure. He's if you're going to put him in a camp. That being said, he has told me that he studied the other side as well. But if you're going to put him in a camp, he's very exploitive. In fact, I tell JD all the time he's the best exploitive player in Dallas.
Sounds like me, because people say I'm tight because they don't see me bluffing, but of course, everybody has to bluff.
Sure.
But I just don't get caught bluffing.
Yeah.
And I guess as high stakes, getting caught bluffing is really part of the game, right? Whereas lower stakes, like bluffing is just to win the pot. You're not trying to create any image or set any kind of like session.
Yeah, that's a good point. So like just in general, just from a strategy standpoint, the higher you go, the less big blinds you're going to win. That's just how there's a linear relationship to 1-2 to 2-5 to all the way up to 50 and 100 that you're just going to win. You're not going to crush the game as much because there are going to be better players. And again, like we talked about before, even the like business guys or like really successful people, some of them will throw themselves into studying. Some of them will just really pay attention in the game and just get better by experience. So like it's definitely a harder, different game.
It's a high variance too, right?
It's a high variance. Yeah, the lower your big blinds per hour goes, the bigger your swings are, right? And because of that, if you never bluff in a high stakes game, people are going to see. People are also going to talk about it because it's a very small community, and then people are just going to fold to you. This has happened to a lot of players that have run through the high stakes community in Dallas. People just start folding to you, but there's also something else, and this is what a lot of people don't realize. Once you make it past like 5-10, 10-25, like those are the open games in Dallas that run in these card rooms. Once you get past that, usually all the games are private, and once the games are private, it's about people actually enjoying playing against you, and that has a couple of facets, and one of those is no one wants to play against a nit that never bluffs. Yeah. Right. So bluffing is a big part of not only making sure that people don't just exploitively fold to you, like we do all the time to other players, right? But the other part of it is, am I fun to play with? Is it fun for the business guy if I just always roll over the nuts, or is it fun for the business guy where he's going to catch me? Not just occasionally, a lot, because I'm bluffing a lot. So that's the sort of advice that I would give, is be fun. The other thing too is when you get in the high stakes, have some life experience. And what I mean by that is it's good to have a job, traveled, other interests that you read. Like, you're going to spend a lot of time with the same people around the same table, working on yourself. Yeah. Having those experiences, having things to talk about really matters, because I love poker, but poker can be kind of boring sometimes. Right. So having that conversation, being able to make people laugh, and just generally making sure that people have a good time is one of the most important things playing in the high stakes community, because it tends to be pretty private. Right.
Well, that's a good information. So where are you going to go from here with your poker career or poker ambitions?
I can't. I work in information security. I'll probably never leave it. I really love it. I identify with being a hacker. It's something that's a huge part of my identity. I really like it. I'll probably never move away from it. So poker's always just going to be something fun that I do on the side, and I'm going to see how big I can play. It's going okay at 25-50 and occasionally 50-100, but again, like we talked about earlier, the big blinds per hour goes down as you go higher in stakes, and for all I know, I'm a loser in the game, right? Next year I could lose big, right?
But actually, here's the one thing: does it? Because somebody told me like 10-25 and I guess 25-50, it is more difficult. But once you jump to 50-100, let's say 100 to 200, it doesn't get difficult, because now you're playing with a lot of rich people that just want to play for fun.
So,
is that true?
Yeah, people say that. I don't agree with it, and it's what I talked about earlier. First of all, there's never enough of just purely rich guys to fill a game. You always need sort of the winning players that can stay in the game because they're winning, because otherwise the game wouldn't make. It's just too small of a community, right? So there's that, but also just I think a lot of the guys that play higher just tend to get better. I mean, when you put in the reps against someone like JD, and you're constantly every week, 3 times a week playing against JD, you're gonna get better.
Right. There's
no two ways about it. You're just gonna get better. So I respectfully disagree with that. I mean, maybe there's some games out there that are just purely businessmen games, but I haven't seen them.
Okay. Yeah. So it's gonna get difficult as you get up still.
Yeah, for sure. And it gets harder every year. More people study. People plug leaks. People drop out of the game, and the game gets harder. So, yeah.
All right. One last thing is, what is your biggest ambition that you have in mind right now? If things keep going like that, do you have somewhere where this is where I want to go? I'm done, or just?
Yeah. Honestly, man, I'm living out all my boyhood fantasies right now.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I've already done more than I ever thought I would ever do in poker. As far as like being able to play at a 5100 game, like that was something I never thought I would be able to do. So I guess now it's all extra. So I would love one day to go play the Hustler stream against G-Man and have him take like 50K from me. That would be fun,
Sounds fun. All right, Kyle. Thanks for helping me getting the podcast going again, and hopefully, I think we try to have you on again and try to get some more insights and see where things go from there.
Thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you guys for listening, and you guys have a nice day.